For more, I'm joined by William Lawrence. He's a political science and international affairs professor at American University. Professor Lawrence, thanks so much for joining us. First, two groups, the SLM and the SPLM, didn't sign on. How much of a problem is that, given that those groups have significant military capacity and represent quite large groups in Sudan?
Well, you have it exactly right. These are the two largest groups representing the largest numbers of people that haven't signed on and with the greatest military authority. It is significant that one of the two groups has a truce and says that they won't fight with the main government until the government's formation excludes religion. And there was a declaration in the Juba Accord about the multi-confessional nature of the Sudanese government. So that's trending in the right direction. The other group hasn't even participated in talks. So the way to think of it is there are 5 regions of conflict in Sudan. 3 of them have final deals now, and 2 of them have partial deals with these holdout groups. So we're well on the way in terms of the numbers of groups. But again, these largest groups haven't been satisfied yet, and they have a range of issues that are still stopping them from coming up with either framework or final agreements.
So I wanted to touch on that. The agreement addressed a number of tricky issues: land ownership, reparations, power sharing, of course, refugees and IDPs, very important. But what are some of these issues that couldn't be agreed upon, and where do we go from there?
One is the nature of the government. Another is compensation. Another is what rights and property the returning 3 million refugees will have. But I would say probably the biggest complicating factor right now are none of that. Number one, it's infighting within Sudan's traditional government and the questions about whether this is really a democracy, because all these agreements hinge on whether or not there's actual democratic transition going on towards transition towards democracy. And the other part is economically. The Sudanese economy is in free fall. We've had major flooding, and the government can't deliver, and the citizens won't be satisfied if they don't have the economic conditions to support these political agreements. So the context is fraught with all kinds of problems, even though we had an important step today with the formal signing of the latest deal.
Even if this peace deal is incomplete, it's obviously still quite significant. What changes can the people of Sudan expect to see?
Well, among other things, there's a $750 million fund spread over 2 years to pay these populations to be happier. There's sort of 6 different ways, including transitional justice, that they should be seeing improvements. And there's even, they get to control 40% of their local parliaments, and they get 5 ministers in the cabinet of the transitional government. So there's a lot of gestures in that regard. And if Sudan was really a good democracy, this would probably be enough to guarantee a certain amount of political and economic well-being. The problem is that with all of the infighting and question marks about the sincerity of this democratic transition, it's not clear whether the officials in place will actually be implementing the deal. And so the devil's really in the details and in the implementation rather than what's on paper.
Does this agreement have significance beyond Sudan, for the MENA region, for the African continent, perhaps?
Well, there are many externalities that are important, and also external forces that could be spoilers in the agreement. But I think there are several that are the highest important. One is Sudan produces refugees that head towards Europe, which has a destabilizing effect on Europe. Going through Libya, you hear about the Libyan migration issues all the time. And this could begin to end that and could foster the return of these 3 million displaced people. There's also a lot of Sudanese fighters going to Yemen via Saudi Arabia, going to Libya to fight in mostly behalf of the Eastern government. And so if this reduces the flow of mercenaries going to these conflicts, that's good. And of course, we have fragile political transitions going on in Ethiopia and other neighboring countries. We have terrorism issues across the Sahel region. So if we can sort of move Sudan off the hot button list and pay attention to some of these other conflicts with the international resources and with the countries helping Sudan moving on to help with some of these other conflicts in the region, that's a definite plus.
All right, William Lawrence from American University, thanks so much for joining us.